Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you in another review. Sorry about that. And as you can tell from the title up there, it is another review of a version of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Now this time I tackle the longest version of Hamlet in any incarnation, other than a straight play adaptation. It is the 96 film, directed and starring Kenneth Branagh among an ensemble cast from 1906. Now, my history of this film is interesting because when I was in 12th grade English, when we read Hamlet, we didn't actually fully read it. We had the book in front of us while we watched this film, since it's unabridged. You can basically just watch it and read along, and you basically get it. But of course, you're getting someone's interpretation of the words while being able to follow along, which was interesting to see. Of course, I got more out of it reading it the second time in English just recently, but it's still a good tool if you're strapped for time or if you want to make sure everyone is following along. Now, it has a 7.9 on IMDb, as a 90 with the audience on Rotten Tomatoes and a 95 with the critics, and this is the consensus. Branagh's sprawling, finely textured adaptation of Shakespeare's masterpiece lives up to its source material, using strong performances and a sharp cinematic focus to create a powerful, resonant film that wastes none of its 246 minutes. That's long, which
is a little over 4 hours, if I remember right. Now, as I've already said, it's the first unabridgment, and prior to this, the longest one was a 1980 BBC made-for-television version starring Derek Jacobi, which I might track that down one day. I'm promoting to do theatrical films now, but one of these days I might review that one, and also the one the BBC did a couple years ago that we also watched partially in the English class recently. That one was interesting because it had Patrick Stewart as Claudius, and it had some very interesting acting interpretations in it. Now, the film was shot at Blenheim Palace, which is the exterior, and the interiors were photographed at a studio, and it was blended together, which is blended flawlessly. You can actually imagine they all filmed this on location. And sadly, this was also the last major dramatic motion picture to be filmed entirely on 70mm film, or at least until a couple years ago when The Master was made. It's kind of sad that this was the last for that, but it kind of works and it adds to the look of the film because the film looks magnificent. One little funny thing I have to mention is that this film was released on Christmas Day in '96. So it's like, hey Dad, we're taking you to the movies for Christmas. Hey, what are we going to see, Dad? We're going to go see Hamlet. Aww. If your dad was a Shakespeare fan, he probably would have enjoyed it. Now, the film was made for about $18 million, but sadly it only made a little less than 5, which I can understand why, even though the film does have an intermission, which if you haven't seen a lot of old films, you'll notice that some of the long ones used to have intermissions. This one does, but I think it's in a weird spot because it's at the near the end of Act 4. Granted, that's a good place to place an intermission, but it's a little weird. With not that much of the film left, you'd think it'd probably be a little bit sooner, but I think it's an interesting place. But it did receive some Academy Award nominations.
Make sure you lock both doors when you leave.
Okay.
Okay, and just read
I will.
the dirty clothes.
Sorry about that. No. Anyway, it got nominated for Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Original Score for Patrick Doyle, and Best Writing Adapted Screenplay, which I can say definitely deserved all of those nominations. I'm surprised, though, if it deserved to win any, it would probably be Costume Design or Art Direction. I'm surprised it didn't win. And Doyle's score deserved to be nominated because it's a very fitting score. It does kind of have like a classical sound, and again, he might have put some classical music in it at parts, but it seems like he just went for that classical sound. Now, in addition to Branagh as Hamlet, we have Derek Jacobi as Claudius, which is funny that he's Claudius in this version when he was Hamlet in the previous long version, which apparently at times during filming he would think of Hamlet's lines instead of Claudius's, but he's probably one of the better actors, at least fitting the role in this film. We got Juliet Christie as Gertrude, which she came out of retirement to play this role. Richard Breers as Polonius, which he really fits his role too. And this is not the first time he collaborated with Branagh. He collaborated with him on Henry V, Swan Song, Peter's Friends, Much Ado About Nothing, Frankenstein, and A Midwinter's Tale. If I remember right, in Frankenstein he played the blind man. Kate Winslet is Ophelia in this film, which
it's interesting to see her doing Shakespeare, especially if you only know her from Titanic or some other stuff. Nicholas Farrell as Horatio. He also does an interesting job. He'd also worked with Brana on A Midwinter's Tale, and he co-starred with him in Othello, which I think is the only Shakespeare film that Brana did that he didn't actually direct or anything. Michael Maloney as Laertes. He also did a very great job. Rufus Sewell as Fortinbras. He's only in a couple scenes, and he looks the part. He's there for what he has to do. Now for the supporting characters, we got Robin Williams as the fop Osric, which he does a very great job. I'm only going to go through a couple of them. Gerard Depardieu as Reynaldo, who is a servant of Polonius. He is okay for what he has to do, but his character's not that deep. Timothy Spall and Rhys Dinsdale as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They're okay. And we got Jack Lemmon as Marcellus, who is a sentry at Elsinore. Ian, I'm not going to pronounce his last name, as Bernardo, another sentry. Ray Ferron as Francisco, another sentry. Then Brian Blessed is the ghost of Hamlet's father, which, how they portray Hamlet's father in this film, or in the previous two, with the Olivier version, it's obviously a ghost. With the Gibson version, it's debatable whether he's a ghost or a trickster figure. This one, you could also go either way, but they make it a little bit more obvious it could go either way. And it seems more likely he could be a trickster, just taking on the form of it, but he seems a little bit more like he'd be a demon instead of just a trickster demon in this one, because of him causing supernatural stuff to happen around them. It's a little bit more over the top than the previous two ones, but it adds a little bit more fear to it. It's like, is this ghost really going to do all this to us? And it also makes it, he also looks a little bit weirder later in the scene, where instead of in his armor like normally, in the later scene he's in like a robe. We got Billy Crystal as the first gravedigger, which he delivers one of my favorite lines from the play very well. We got Simon Russell Bailey as the second one. I'm not going to go through all of them. Now, this one's a very interesting one. We got Charlton Heston as the player king. That's right, Heston did Shakespeare. So it's very interesting to see him deliver it, especially the whole speech that sets up to Hamlet's next soliloquy. Rosemary Harris as the player queen. She does a good job. Richard Attenborough. This one is very funny as the English ambassador. I got a little funny story to mention about this one from the English class. When we were watching it in that English class and this scene comes up, someone in my class goes, "Who's that?" Without missing a beat, my teacher pauses the movie, looks at him and goes, "That's John Hammond from Jurassic Park, you dumbass." And the funny thing is, he followed it up the next year when Jeff had him. He paused, he's like, "Does anyone know who this man is?" Jeff raised his hand. "Isn't that John Hammond from Jurassic Park?" Because if he remembered, I told him the story. We got John Mills as the old King Norway, just a small cameo. Ken Dodd is Yorick, you know, the skull guy in a flashback. And that's about it for all of it. Now, text-wise, the film uses the first folio along with the second quarto, which gives it a very great completeness, I guess you could say. I guess that's the best way. It's a very complete text, I guess you could say. Now, let me see. I'm trying to find the making of stuff on here. Okay. Aspects of the film staging are based on Adrian Noble's Shakespeare Company production of the play in which Brana had played the title role, which I don't have it anymore because I resold it, but in the copy of Hamlet I had that I showed you in the Olivier version review, there are a few pictures from that one, and looking at those pictures and watching this, I'm like, okay, I can see a lot of where he got that from, and that would probably explain some of the slight theatrical parts in the film, because some of the parts, like, okay, that's a little weird to see on in a theatrical film, but it'd make more sense on stage, because projecting and all that's different on stage than it is on the film. And it'd explain why Brana seems to be going a little over the top at times, because, you know, he's probably basing it more on his theatrical one. Makes a little sense, though, when you watch it in the context of the play. Now, a thing about this is that when Brana was trying to get this film made, at first no studio wanted to finance it for two reasons. One, they didn't see how Shakespeare film in this late in the 20th century could make money, and as we've already seen in retrospect, they were kind of right, because the film did lose money. and also because they knew about the commercial and critical disappointment, at least in America, that is, of Branagh's previous film, Frankenstein, which I've reviewed. By the time I did this, you know I enjoyed the film, and currently it's actually tied for one of my favorite of the adaptations, the other one being, of course, Bride of Frankenstein. He eventually got funding from Castle Rock Studio, and they agreed to do it with two conditions. One, that they would also have a 2.5 hour 35mm print of the film for wide release, which I don't know how. I'd actually be interested in seeing how that one flows. Maybe they cut out some of the other characters or something, but it'd be interesting to see. And also a star-studded cast, which, as I've already read off a lot of the cast members, you can see that they did get that in, so that at least worked. Now, one thing I'll say that really works to this film's advantage is that it does use flashbacks, which go with Branagh's interpretation of the text, and of course integrating characters that are not seen in the play at that time, or not seen in the play at all, like Old Norway, to add more leverage to the dialogue, which on stage you can get away with that because you know it's staged, so you don't have as much elaborate thing. On film, it's interesting to actually interlade that. So at least from an editing perspective, this is probably my favorite of the three films, at least from editing, because you add that in, adds a little bit more of a dramatic flair to it, and adds to certain scenes, like Heston's monologue as the player. You add a little flashback of the story he's telling. With Hamlet's Yorick speech, you add some flashbacks of him and Yorick telling jokes as the court jester. When they're talking about Old Norway earlier, you have a scene of him reading a dispatch that they're sending, and also of him rebuking Fortinbras later. And of course, they actually do make it seem like Fortinbras is actually going to attack Denmark and not actually going to attack the Polak, which is interesting, and that's Branagh's interpretation. Upon reading it, I can actually see that that's debatable. He could be going to attack them, or he could actually be going to visit them on their way back and, you know, thank him personally for allowing them to go through, and then of course he just stumbles upon it. Which, since this is an unabridged version, I don't think I really need to go into plot details. You know, Hamlet finds out from the ghost that Claudius killed his father. He acts crazy for a bit. He finds out through the play that Claudius did kill him. He eventually kills Polonius by mistake. Claudius wants to kill him. Laertes wants to kill Hamlet when he finds out. Ophelia goes insane and dies. Which this film really does hint that she probably did commit suicide. It's a very subtle hint, but it works. You know, pulling a key out of her mouth and obviously escaping. So she either drowned herself intentionally or accidental. So I go with maybe, I don't care which way, but it seems more likely that that's a hint that she could have killed herself. And it works considering that they keep in the whole thing about the gravediggers contemplating whether or not she committed suicide or not. Now, acting-wise, like I've already mentioned, there are a lot of theatrical elements in here. Mainly in Branagh's one, but that's because he's one of those ones that could do stage and film. And it's mostly in his soliloquies, like the soliloquy where he's rebuking himself for not killing Claudius, or acting on revenge yet. He does go a little over the top in it, but it does seem like it's appropriate even though it's on film, because he is a little angry at himself, and you know he's like, you know, if you could hit yourself, you'd be doing that, because he hasn't acted against him, which I think personally in that speech Hamlet's being a little too hard on himself, because he doesn't, as he even admits at the end of the speech, he doesn't know whether this is the devil trying to trick him into self-damnation or actually his father's ghost, which is why he does the whole thing with the play in the first place. Which is interesting to see. That's probably the most over-the-top Branagh gets in it. The later one about Bloody, he does a little bit of that. I know on some of the scenes on YouTube people say that it's like Branagh's trying to act instead of acting, but I disagree. I see him as acting, but as I've already said, it's more like he's doing half film, half theatrical style, but with the tone the film has, it kind of works. I'd say he's not my favorite of the Hamlets. Olivier's still my favorite of the Hamlets, but that's because he seems to have a more natural thing. But I'd say that Branagh's probably my second favorite at the moment, because even though, not to say a bad thing about Gibson in the previous film I reviewed, but Branagh just seems to say it a little bit more naturally. Maybe it's also because he has all of the text to work with, or maybe because he's also directing himself and he had played the character previously on stage, so maybe it's just that. He just seems to say it a little bit more naturally than Gibson, but not as naturally as Olivier. But then again, different eras and the films are set differently, and they're interpreting it differently, so maybe it's just that. They both say it naturally, it's just different things, probably. And a lot of the actors do say it naturally, like Jacoby and Christie say their lines naturally. Rears definitely says his Polonius lines naturally. Winslet, it's very interesting to see her say her Ophelia stuff. And you watch her like, she should have done more Shakespeare. And she does do the crazy part very well. You're like, dang, she really is insane. Farrell as Horatio, he's fine, like I've already said. Maloney as Laertes, he does go a little over the top near the end when Laertes is pissed, but you can kind of understand. I mean, his dad's dead, he doesn't know how. He doesn't know his sister's crazy yet. He thinks the king might have done it, and he's coming with a bunch of people who want Laertes as king and want to overthrow Claudius, so of course he's going to be a little... I'm trying to think of the appropriate word for this. He'd be a little... into it, I guess you could say, especially the theatrical nature of the film. Robin Williams is Osric. He does both subtle and over-the-topness depending on the scene. Like, in his introduction, he's very subtle. But it's during the duel near the end, that's where he goes a little slight. It's a little slight over the top, but it's more with his voice, not with his body language. You know, it's mostly because his character's supposed to be a kiss, you know what, a suck-up, a yes-man, basically. And he's a fop, so it kind of fits. Though the only thing I question is, why did Osric have to get shanked? Because when someone yells treachery, he gets shanked, and then when he's saying his last line, he's just holding his hand over it and speaking nonchalantly. It's like, you just got stabbed, dude. You shouldn't be talking like that. It's just one of those weird things. They do include, of course, Polonius' last line, I am slain. Kind of funny. And like the previous two films, during the whole play scene, we do see that people are noticing the correlation between what we're seeing on on stage, and the king and queen, which that's not really in the text, but it is a little funny thing to add to it, because it's like, though there's one part in that scene I think goes a little too over the top, and that's how Brana delivers the whole thing about what's going to happen next in the play. But I think the other two films do that a little bit better, but it fits the tone, I guess. That's all I can say. It's just not how I would have interpreted it. Now the sword fight is also a little bit slightly over the top, but that's near the end. It's a little weird, but it kind of seems to fit it because it's going for the whole swashbuckler thing, buckler appeal at the same time while the outside of the castle is being stormed by Fortinbras and his men. So it's kind of a little interesting. It's also a big contrast to the previous two duels, where the first duel was more, more probably like how it would be done on stage, and still the same thing with Gibson's one, just a bigger budgeted one. But this one, it's very large, and it's interesting. Of course, it makes Osric's last line a little weird, considering what happens to Laertes, but I think it's still good that he asked, because he's checking on the guy. He's like, how art thou with Laertes? Still a valid question. And then, of course, Claudius' death. I think he gets it good in this one. Sword to the chest while getting hit with a candlestick. Defend me, friends! All that. And there's nothing really else much to say about the film without, giving every single little thing away. I don't. I'm just gonna talk about a lot of the big things. If you're not really a fan of films that have a theatrical flair to them, you probably won't like this film added to the length. And if you're not a Shakespeare fan, you probably won't like this. You probably want to stick with either the Olivier version or the Gibson version, just to, get the gist of it. But I'll say this: if you've always been curious in watching Hamlet on stage, but you've never been able to find it, or you've been curious to see how Brana would do it, I definitely would recommend it. If you can't find the DVD, it is on VHD. That's how I had to watch it. It's in 3 parts, though, and they're split at very interesting intervals, though. Now, do I think the film deserved a flop? No, but hopefully it's actually made back the rest of its budget on home video. I mean, it's been out almost 20 years, 18 years as I've recorded this, almost 18 years actually, so hopefully it has made back its money. I give it a 4 out of 5 stars, and you've already got my recommendation for it. Now, after this, I got one more Hamlet-related film to review, and then maybe I'll do a video afterwards talking about my personal thoughts on the play and how I see certain things. I'm not going to give any promises on whether I'll do that one or not. But the next one I think you'll find very interesting, and those of you who know anything about this film, you'll know why it's being reviewed next.